You call yourself hunter, but your fear makes you smell like prey.
Wind and Moon, Wolf Lord.
Hey everyone, it's your local Game Master Jimmy here, and today we're talking about Animal Lords. Animal Lords are a rather unique creature to explore within Dungeons & Dragons. While they have uniquely existed for a long time in Dungeons & Dragons, they didn't gain their unique name tag of Animal Lords right away. It all began with this gem right here, the Cat Lord. Now, I will say, there is unfortunately not as much art for any Animal Lords in general, but you can assume they are either human-looking, anthro-humanoid, or actual animals. And I try to include art from published material usually, so there might just not be as much in this video in general. Cat Lords, and to a greater extent Animal Lords, were first introduced in 1st edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. While we don't get a full understanding of the nature of these lordly spirits of the Beastlands, we're taught early on the nature of them through the Cat Lord. While our earliest explanation in the AD&D manual of the planes can give us a general understanding, let's explore a greater depiction of this creature. At their core, Animal Lords are primal nature spirits that take on humanoid and animal form. They were believed to be near godlike creatures that hailed from the Happy Hunting Grounds, or the Beastlands, as commonly known. It's a synonymous term. Having both superhuman intelligence and strength with varying sizes, they cannot be defined in one size category, given the nature of their anatomy being shapeshifters from a humanoid form which stood around 6 feet tall and their animal form, which would vary based on the animal form they took. This has not, however, been a rather fluid, defined aspect of the Animal Lord. They have also been depicted to have a hybrid form crossing the animal and humanoid form. However, an aspect that has not remained consistent is their names. In their first introduction, which is only touched on and does not appear with a stat block, the Animal Lords were referred to as Beast Lords, or Masters of the Cult of Beasts. That minor difference aside, each Animal Lord was unique and didn't belong to a specific alignment, only truly acting on the merits of what worked best for their animal kin. This could be represented by acting similarly to the animals they were lords of, or believing themselves protectors and acting more assertive. Each Animal Lord was believed to inhabit and travel between the material plane and the Beastlands, guarding the well-being of the animal they lorded over in some way or another. This unique relationship granted them connections to these animals, allowing them to conjure and communicate with them. The powers would then extend to be stuff like full ESP and telepathy, which would ultimately lead to them having borderline precognition. Predict the prediction line, if you get the meme. By most stretches of conceptual understanding, the Beast Lords were demigods. The big difference between each lord was their abilities and their features, as they were unique to the animal they lorded over. And while there's a lot of Animal Lords that exist, some would say one for each animal. Not even the Forgotten Realms has covered or mentioned every one. While I would love to say there's an extensive lore of each one of the lords, that is unfortunately where I have to let you down. From among mentioned Animal Lords throughout published lore, we have heard of the Animal Lords for cat, dog, wolf, lizard, hawk, rabbit, worm, fox, owl, horse, tigers, badger, camel, and mammoth. From among those sources, there are hints at lords having connections to other types of beasts like dinosaurs, but again, not a lot of info on it, just more mentions of this. That said, there has really only been a large focus on a few of them, specifically the cat, wolf, and hawk. While the lizard lord is often included in this list, I chose not to include it because a lot of me saying it is on there would be more so it has a stat block, or it did have a stat block. So from among our 3 most covered Animal Lords, we have the cat, wolf, and hawk. And among those 3, the most explored is the Cat Lord, given its initial appearance in the 1977 Monster Manual, where it wasn't referred to as an Animal Lord, but just a Cat Lord. It was later that it was interpreted as being a type of Animal Lord. The Cat Lord is described many times in the Forgotten Realms as a humanoid that could be dark-skinned or pale-skinned with dark hair, always dressed in dark attire with simple gold accessories inlaid with gems that would match cat's eye. A unique quality to the Cat Lord is that many find a certain allure to the Cat Lords either through envy or admiration, so the Lord is known for their natural magnetism. Of course, if you know anything about cats, you know that they don't always like to have people around, but that doesn't necessarily mean that people don't like to be around them. The Cat Lord featured 2 additional forms, a black cat or panther with sharp teeth and claws, as well as their hybrid form that shared all the features aforementioned. This would be an early reference to their anthropomorphic nature, which will appear in later editions. Now, the Cat Lord had somewhat of an indifference in personality to most people's feelings. While some might take the stance to state they did not harbor much care for anything, similar to cats. Cat Lords cared deeply, of course, for the well-being of other cats. This is a common theme you'll see among the Animal Lords. A differentiating ability from some other Animal Lords was the Cat Lord had exceptional vision and the capability to bound great heights with ease, always landing on their feet. They had endurance greater than that of a horse's, don't tell the Horse Lord, and they were silent without fail under most circumstances. Now, if you don't already notice, the Lords all kind of have powers based around their animal and just taken to the extreme. So given the nature of magic's ability to imbue prowess to creatures, many Animal Lords had spells that would imbue their normal capabilities that would match a theme related to their animal. In the case of the Cat Lord, they could cast haste, blur, speed, or spells like improved invisibility. And while these features appear as unique, some of their stronger spell capability, like planar travel and teleportation, was actually a shared feature to all Animal Lords. Throughout editions, Cat Lords gained the ability to conjure forth powerful felines like giant lynxes or were-tigers, but could also take on the abilities of very competent monks or master thieves when in humanoid forms. The cat form specifically of the Cat Lord was also rather capable, able to stun creatures with its howl or hiss and spit into the faces of their foes, causing magical blindness. And I like to think this is like the representation of a cat spraying, just like this is my ground, get blinded. And a last fun feature was they could actually lick their wounds, which would actually cast Cure Light wounds. And I find that funny because that's what cats do when they're injured, is they'll lick their wounds. Cat Lords are probably the most explored Animal Lord and likely a point at which the actual Animal Lord creature stemmed from. And with that, it shouldn't come as a surprise to know that they were featured in the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons DC comic, which explores a concept of the transition of the title of Cat Lord from one to another, referred as a Kitten Lord. The concept brings a unique take on how Animal Lords might pass on their power to a descendant or a worthy subject. This concept is only brought up for the Cat Lord, but I think it is a very interesting way to show that there is only ever one of each Animal Lord, and their power is passed on through successors. If it isn't abundantly clear, there isn't going to be a whole lot of lore for the rest of this either. The Cat Lords just had a decent amount, but again, we're lacking in a lot of departments here. They could always be explored more. So the Wolf Lord is described as having a humanoid form around 6 feet tall. You'll catch that theme is the same for all Animal Lords, but they appear more of a younger teenage year, with a scruffy appearance similar to that of a lupine look, although much more subtle than any other Animal Lords, kind of like Jacob from Twilight, just that's their description there. In their wolf form, the Wolf Lord appeared as a great gray wolf, an ideal leader of a huge pack of wolves, and this was the form the Lord would always fight in. While having similar mannerisms to the other lords, the Wolf Lord would also be described as sociable, cunning, and even wily. People saw them as a bit strange, a bit brutal and uncaring, and while some saw the behavior as maybe even evil, it was largely just the Wolf Lord's embodiment of the wolfish characteristic, and similar to all lords, the Wolf Lord had that ESP telepathy and actually even had immunity to charm, which most of them did. But they also featured magical resistance. And a unique feature was their complete immunity to non-magical weapons while in their wolf form. And while in their humanoid form, they actually had a dagger of venom that would perpetually stay poisoned as long as they were the one wielding it. So moving past the Wolf Lord, because unfortunately that's like the most I can pull from it other than just giving you guys stat blocks, the Hawk Lord is described as having a humanoid form represented originally as a beautiful woman around 6 feet tall like all Animal Lords are, but having subtle hawk-like features with a great deal of confidence and even an air of nobility. Their hawk form had only minor distinguishes from them and a normal hawk. The Hawk Lord is remarkably intelligent, to the point of optimizing any choice that favored their dominion at a level of amorality. Though, unlike many other Animal Lords, due to their high intelligence and strong self-confidence, the Hawk Lord enjoyed interacting with humans, probably to the point of toying with them. And similar to all lords, the Hawk Lord had ESP, telepathy, and of course immunity to charm, and some magical resistance. It's kind of unique around all of them, but the Hawk Lord specifically had the ability to cast the anti-magic shell spell, which is just a unique spell, which is great. Similar to hawks, the Hawk Lord had incredible eyesight and was extremely dexterous, and while she wasn't the most adept with weapons, she was an expert litigator and could charm many creatures around her. And with the understanding of the numerous listings of animal lords that existed, we can understand that much of their personality and social circle was tied to the animals they were adjacent to. While they weren't necessarily immoral creatures, they were rather amoral. Depending on the animal lord, you might even find yourself assisted by the lord if you entered their domain. Their primary goal was first and foremost protecting their species they lorded over, and this occasionally meant dealing with larger threats. They each had access to unique forms of magic and different combat tricks and capabilities that assisted them in the manner of protection. But, for the most part, their presence alone was enough to deter most. You see, the animal lord was more of a spirit than anything. You couldn't simply kill the animal lord. Its spirit would just inhabit the next adjacent animal of its species in that line of succession, and it would continue its efforts until they were achieved. Meaning, if you wanted to defeat the animal lord, you had to be ready for a fundamental genocide of a species, and that wasn't really something to be fathomed, although I'm sure some D&D groups have tried. So before I go further, I want to explain a concept in D&D that's probably unique and harder to fully grasp, and that is nature being somewhat of a living thing. So the wilderness and untapped lands by man are the natural world, and much of that space serves as a life force for wild creatures, spirits, and even natural magic. When the lore of the game teaches us that druids serve as protectors of the natural world, it shows us that industry and the destruction of wilderness is so abhorrent to the lands because they're a living thing. I mean, in real life, we try to protect trees because they are living things, and D&D just pushes this concept further to say those living things are so potent and essential that they will speak out for themselves and protect themselves, which is also just a nod to the fact that our trees don't have protectors and you should speak out for them in our world. Tangent aside, the nature of the Forgotten Realms is so powerful it has guardians. Of the most potent guardians, we have these animal lords. They often appear when something is disrupting the natural order. By natural order, I don't mean something like a fox eating a rabbit. That is natural and it happens. The animal lords really respond to stuff like overhunting and the destruction of habitats and ecosystems that their animals rely on. So when we want to understand the actions of animal lords, we have to understand what they really only respond to is that imbalance of the natural world. And in most cases, it's going to be creatures of chaos, goblins, kobolds, humans. While these responses can feel brutal to some creatures because they rely on certain materials and claims, it should be understood that it's not really a decision that comes too easily for animal lords because they really just respond to threats of their domain. After all, there is no such thing as animal politics. Of course, that's kind of meaning aside when we say that just because there isn't animal politics doesn't mean that animal lords aren't interested in them on occasion. Specifically the Hawk Lord. Maybe they go back on themselves a little bit here. There aren't many sources connecting the animal lords to deities. This is my transition. Other than stating they very much are nearly deities themselves. Solinar Thalandira was an elven god who shared domain with the Cat Lord and several other animal lords, and much of their alliance was really just vested in sharing hunting grounds and some morals. Airdrie Fania, I know this is going to sound crazy, given the name I just said, was a close ally to the Hawk Lord and many other avian lords. Airdrie, I know. There are occasions in which animal lords appear throughout different stories, but the primary appearance of such lords was the Cat Lord featured in the comics. Like I mentioned for the Cat Lord and similarly other lords, they weren't a population that reproduced. They were each unique and there was only ever one of them. Rather than reproducing, they would name a successor who would take on the form of the animal lord for its species. So it was inherited. The title could be granted to any creature that was at least some form of version of that animal. So a rat lord could grant their title of lord to any rat, were-rat, or a rat-like creature. I actually introduced an animal lord, which was a rat lord in my D&D campaign, and my players were completely unaware of the nature of the creature to this day, which I think is an exceptionally important part of the creature. They can be as influential on a world as needed, but if their primary goal is to preserve their own kind, then that may affect your player characters, or it may not. Regarding variant forms of animal lords, each variant would be each separate type of animal lord you could fathom. So if you have a sloth lord, you could also have a blind salamander lord. The important part of each animal lord was the abilities were uniquely reflected in the animal is based on. For example, a sloth lord might be a slower creature, or maybe it exudes a slowness effect that affects all creatures attempting to harm sloths around it. Its mannerisms will likely reflect sloths as well. it is probably best to do some research into the animal you want to make a lord around. While a wolf lord might care deeply for a pact mentality and hunting together with the others of its kind, the cat lord is more likely to be a loner and an isolationist. Despite their natural magnetism, I think popular media with movies like Zootopia, or really any movie with a talking animal, could be a fun place to base an animal lord after. I think Zootopia came to mind because of that sloth scene at the DMV, but you could also go as far as to use characters like Goofy, Mickey Mouse, or Big Bird as inspirations for animal lords. Obviously, I think those would be more comedic effect, but there is a wide lens and frame to draw inspiration from. So what form of relationship do animal lords have, you might wonder? Obviously, whatever animal they associate with is good, as well as any perceivable adaptation of that creature. So the bear lord would be rather fond of owlbears and be able to communicate with them, which in turn was a rather unique capability of the animal lord. They could speak the language of any perceivable variant of their animal type. So a cat lord was likely allies with and could speak with the caterwaul, the chimera, the displacer beast, the dragon, the commodon, the sea lion, the tabaxi, and the were-tiger. Of course, this led to overlap in the dominions of animal lords, and while not extremely well covered, we can assert that the relationship were primarily based on the preservation of the nature and their own species, so the lords often probably didn't fight on manners in this regard, but that did not mean they all got along with one another, because remember, there is no such thing as animal politics. I have said that line more than once now, because they mentioned it several times in my research. And it is funny to say, because every time they say it, and every time I dig further into the lore for these guys, I believe it less and less. So we get to that point in the video where I'm like, wow, hey, we're already here at the end where I start talking about animal lords in 2024 5e D&D. And they've done some work. So let's go ahead and go over the description and then talk about the art as well after you're kind of looking at it through this description. Animal lords are immortal spirits of legendary animals. They serve as the divine protectors of animals of their kind, and they appear as hybrids of humanoids and the animals they defend. They frequently change into giant, idealized versions of the animals they're associated with, albeit with glowing eyes. When contending with people, they sometimes appear as human-like beings with subtle animal-like features. No matter their appearance, animal lords exhibit the instincts and predilections of animals they represent, tempered by their intellect and experience. Most animal lords make their homes in the Beastlands, but they occasionally journey to the Feywild or other idyllic realms. They rarely travel to the material plane, making exceptions only when a world faces environmental disaster or droves of animals are otherwise in jeopardy. Among the best known animal lords are those that represent cats, hawks, lizards, and wolves, but animal lords exist for beasts of all type. Some animal lords even embody creatures that are rare or extinct on material plane worlds, like megafauna or dinosaurs. Using their divine might, animal lords can summon spectral animals, channel spiritual energy, and exhibit powers associated with one of the three broad groups: foragers, hunters, or sages. These powers are tied into the animal lord's personality and traits associated with the creature it resembles. They then provide a table you can roll on to associate an animal lord that you might want to make and what category it might be under, like an animal lord for the hunter, one for the forager, and one for the sage. And it kind of gives examples of animals that might reflect this area. And not to go into too much detail, but all of these do include a little bit of information as to how their stats are changed by being one of these categories. And I think that's a very important thing. So in a blatant look at the new look and description of the animal lord, the artist and description leaned heavier into the anthropomorphic style, and I think it is actually a healthy direction to push the creature. For one, it allows a more unique art for the creature, and I know I say that with the entire existence of the furry community existing and already doing art for this, but my point is the original art we saw throughout the video largely just looked like humanoids. And while I think the coolest direction would have been some form of Animorph style hybrids of actual small feature changes, if you guys remember Animorphs, this look that they provide though is more love than these creatures have often or ever received, so it is welcome. In most cases, a lot of creatures in the monster manual don't explore many new concepts, and I feel like this is an exception since most of the lore we had was based on the cat lord. We didn't have a large reservoir of info to start from, so they actually explored it more, and I have to commend Wizards of the Coast for writing this, because the most unique feature was relegating each animal lord into groups, the hunter, forager, and sage. I thought this was actually really interesting, and I hope it's a concept that gets explored more, because they actually base the stat block around the different groups. And it's a really unique approach, and I hope that you get to see more of that in other creature stat blocks. That said, this is a CR20 creature, so you probably won't see them often anyways. But hey, you know what? They gave us some new info and a lot more references to spirits and stuff like that. Makes sense given their nature spirits. So that's all fine and great. So whether you picture them as divine guardians of the wilds or strange echoes of primal magic, or just some kind of shape-shifting ally that keeps your adventurers guessing, the Animal Lords remain one of D&D's most fascinating and underappreciated beings. They blur the line between beast and god, between instinct and wisdom, and doing so they remind us that the natural world is never truly separate from the stories we tell at the table. Thank you for watching, and remember, if you ever hear the rustle of leaves on the ground or a predator just a little too close, you might not be dealing with an ordinary animal at all. You might be standing in the presence of a lord. I'm Jimmy, your local game master, and I'll see you guys in the next one.